Katherine Wilson never thought she would fall on a wet sidewalk in front of her own home with a shattered phone, soaked documents, and a blouse so transparent she might as well not have been wearing one. But that's exactly what happened. And that's when she saw him, Mark Thompson, the maintenance worker from the neighboring building, who stood motionless with a bucket and mop, staring straight at her. December rain fell mercilessly on Manhattan's Upper East Side, turning elegant streets into streams of water. Katherine had just stepped out of a taxi, holding a Louis Vuitton leather briefcase in one hand and her phone in the other, finishing a call with the board of directors. She was 38 years old, CEO of a tech company worth $25 million, and she had just closed the biggest deal of her life. She should have been on cloud nine, but all she wanted was a hot bath and a glass of wine. She didn't notice the puddle, didn't see the slippery spot hidden beneath the leaves. Her Louboutin heels, the ones that cost $1,200, simply slipped. The world spun in slow motion. The briefcase flew in one direction, the phone in another, and she landed on the wet pavement with a dull thud that echoed down the entire street. The water was ice cold. It soaked through her silk blouse in seconds, plastering the fabric to her skin like a second layer. Katherine lay there for a moment, dazed, feeling the cold penetrate to her bones. Her carefully styled hair came undone, blonde strands falling across her face. Documents from her briefcase floated around her like white leaves, and her phone screen was shattered in a spiderweb of cracks. "Damn," she whispered, which was very unlike her. Katherine Wilson didn't curse. Katherine Wilson was an icon of control, elegance, and professionalism. And then she heard footsteps. Quick, running footsteps. She looked up and saw him. A man in blue work coveralls was running toward her through the rain, leaving behind his bucket and mop. He had dark, wavy hair, now completely soaked, a beard that looked several days old, and eyes. Those eyes were full of genuine concern, not curiosity or amusement. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he called out, his voice carrying a slight Brooklyn accent as he dropped to his knees beside her without hesitation. His hands, strong and covered with small scars from work, hovered in the air, as if he wasn't sure whether he could touch her. Katherine looked at him, then down at herself. Her white silk blouse was now completely transparent. She could see her beige bra through the fabric, every contour, every detail. The cold had caused her skin to break out in goosebumps, and her nipples had hardened. Everything was visible as clear as day. Her face flushed with heat so intense it momentarily overpowered the cold. "Don't look at my wet blouse," she said automatically, her voice full of desperation and embarrassment. Her hands instinctively rose to cover her breasts, but it was too late. She knew he had seen. She knew by how quickly he looked away, how his cheeks took on a slight shade of red beneath his beard. "I'm not looking, ma'am," he said quietly, but his voice was tense. He kept his gaze fixed somewhere near her left ear. "Please let me help you up." He extended his hand, still not looking at her directly. Katherine hesitated for a moment. A woman who never accepted help from anyone, who had built an empire on her own terms. But the cold was unbearable, and her knee was starting to hurt from the fall. She took his hand. It was warm, rough, strong. He pulled her gently but firmly, and a moment later she was standing on her feet, swaying slightly on her broken heels. "Thank you," she whispered, still trying to cover her blouse with her hands. She felt naked, defenseless, more exposed than ever in her life. And it wasn't just about her body. It was something deeper. This man, this stranger in work coveralls, had seen her at her most human, most pathetic moment. "Mark," he introduced himself, bowing his head in a slight nod, as if to give her privacy. "Mark Thompson. I work as a maintenance supervisor in the building next door. I saw you fall from the window." "Katherine," she responded mechanically, though she knew she didn't have to. Everyone in this neighborhood knew who she was, the woman who drove a black Range Rover, who had the biggest house on the street, who appeared in business magazines. The rain continued to fall, hitting them both. Water streamed down Katherine's face, mixing with her mascara, creating dark streaks. She could feel her carefully applied makeup running, her $200 hairstyle falling apart. She was a ruin, a complete ruin. "Miss Katherine," Mark corrected himself, still keeping his gaze elsewhere. "You need a towel, a coat, anything. Please let me get you something." Before she could respond, He was already running back to the building where he worked. Katherine stood alone on the street, shivering, feeling absurdly helpless. Her documents were ruined, her phone shattered, and she herself, God. She was practically naked in the middle of her street in the rain. What's worse, the Christmas lights on neighbors' trees were starting to come on, which meant people were coming home. Every second she stood here increased the risk of someone seeing her. A journalist, a neighbor, a business competitor. Mark returned in less than a minute, carrying a dark, thick fleece jacket with a maintenance company logo. He didn't look at her as he approached, just held the garment out in front like an offering. "Please," he said simply. Katherine took the fleece with trembling hands and threw it over her shoulders. It was huge, probably 3 sizes too big, and smelled of clean detergent with a hint of cigarette smoke and gasoline. But it was dry and warm. She wrapped herself in it like a blanket, feeling warmth slowly begin to return to her body. "Thank you," she said again, this time with more strength in her voice. She looked at him, really looked for the first time. He was maybe 40, maybe a bit older. Brown eyes, tired but kind. A face lined with wrinkles that spoke of years of hard work. He wasn't handsome in the classical sense. Not like her ex-husband, a lawyer with a perfect jaw and hair from a commercial. But there was something about him. Something authentic. "Your documents," Mark said, crouching to gather the soaked papers from the ground. Katherine wanted to tell him to stop, that it was pointless, but the words stuck in her throat when she saw how carefully he placed each page, how gently he handled her destroyed phone. "It's all useless," she said quietly. "The phone is shattered, the documents completely ruined." "Maybe they can be saved," Mark replied, standing up and handing her the briefcase. "I have a friend who fixes phones, and documents can be dried and scanned." His optimism was so foreign to her world. In her world, when something broke, you simply bought a new one, the best, the most expensive. But he was talking about repair, about salvage. "Do you live here?" he asked, pointing to the house behind her, an elegant, 2-story building with panoramic windows and a double garage. "Yes," she answered, suddenly aware of how absurdly wealthy it looked. Her house was worth over $4 million, probably more than this man would earn in his entire lifetime. "Do you have keys?" he asked practically. Katherine began searching the pockets of her jacket, which was as soaked as everything else. Her fingers trembled from the cold, or from something else, she wasn't sure. Keys. Where were her damn keys? She finally found them in an inner pocket, but when she tried to pull them out, her hands shook so badly that she dropped them on the ground. "I'm sorry," she whispered, feeling her eyes begin to sting. She didn't cry. Katherine Wilson didn't cry. But she was exhausted, soaked, humiliated, and suddenly all those years of building walls around herself began to crumble. Mark picked up the keys without a word. He looked at her, really looked, and in his eyes was something she hadn't seen in years, compassion. Not pity, not superiority, just pure human compassion. "May I walk you to your door?" he asked quietly. Katherine nodded, not trusting her own voice. Together they walked the short path to her front door, their steps quiet on the wet concrete. Mark opened the door with the key, turning it smoothly in the lock as if he'd done it hundreds of times. The door opened with a soft click. Warmth from the house hit her like a wave. Katherine stepped inside, turning to look at the man who had just saved her from total humiliation. "Really, thank you," she said, taking off his fleece. "For everything. I don't know what I would have done if not for." "Please keep it," Mark interrupted, raising his hand. "For tonight. Please warm up, dry off. You can return it tomorrow, or whenever. But please," he said firmly but gently, "really it's just an old fleece." Their eyes met for a moment longer than it should have been. And Katherine felt something strange in her chest. Not attraction yet, but curiosity. When was the last time someone had given her something without expecting something in return? "Good night, Miss Katherine," Mark said, backing away and already turning to leave. "Good night," she whispered, watching him disappear into the rain, his silhouette blurring in the darkness. She closed the door and leaned against it, still wrapped in his fleece. The house was empty. It was always empty. Her ex-husband had left 3 years ago with a younger assistant. She had no children. Her parents were dead. It was just her and her success and a silence so deep it sometimes hurt. Katherine removed her soaked blouse, pants, everything, leaving wet tracks on the marble floor. She stepped into the shower, so hot it burned her skin, but still couldn't stop shivering. And the whole time she thought about him, about Mark Thompson, about the maintenance worker who didn't look at her transparent blouse, who didn't take advantage of her weakness, who simply helped. Why? Katherine wasn't naive. She knew how the world worked. People helped because they wanted something in return: money, connections, status. But Mark hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't even taken his fleece back. That night, lying in her huge empty bedroom, Katherine couldn't stop thinking about the dark eyes of the man who had saved her from the most humiliating moment of her life. And she didn't know why, but it terrified her more than any business deal she'd ever made. Katherine woke at 6 in the morning, as always. Her body operated like a Swiss watch, regardless of what had happened the previous evening. 30 years of discipline didn't disappear that easily. But when she opened her eyes and saw Mark Thompson's soaked fleece hanging on the chair by her bed, everything came rushing back like a blow. The fall, the transparent blouse, his eyes that didn't look. She reached out and touched the fleece fabric. It was already almost dry, but still carried that same scent: detergent, smoke, something masculine and practical. So different from the Tom Ford cologne her ex-husband wore. So different from the sterile, air-conditioned air in her office. She should return the fleece today. It was the only sensible thing to do. But something in her resisted that thought. Maybe because it would mean seeing him again. Maybe because she wasn't sure what to say. Her phone, a new iPhone she'd had her assistant buy and deliver at 5 a.m., buzzed on the nightstand. 12 missed calls. 27 messages. The business world didn't slow down, even when you fell in a puddle. Katherine took a quick shower, dressed in a dark Armani suit, and tied her hair in a tight bun. Her makeup was perfect: foundation, bronzer, nude lipstick. The woman in the mirror looked like always, powerful, in control, unattainable. But the fleece lay on the chair, and she couldn't stop looking at it. By 8 a.m. Katherine was already in her office on the 23rd floor of a downtown Manhattan skyscraper. Panoramic windows showed the entire city, gray, damp, pulsing with life. But she wasn't looking. She was looking at the fleece she'd placed in an elegant paper bag. Miss CEO, Magdalena, her assistant, knocked lightly on the door. "The board is waiting for the meeting at 9. Do you need to prepare the presentation?" "Already ready," Katherine answered automatically, not taking her eyes off the bag. Magdalena hesitated at the door. She'd known her boss for 7 years and knew when something was wrong. "Is everything all right?" she asked carefully. "Yes," Katherine answered. Too quickly. "Everything's fine." But it was a lie. Nothing had been fine since last night. She felt unstable, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted, as if her carefully constructed life suddenly showed cracks. The board meeting dragged on until noon. Katherine led it with surgical precision, answering every question, anticipating every objection. She was in her element. She was invincible. But when she returned to her office, the first thing she did was look at the bag with the fleece. She had to return it. Today. Now at 5 p.m., Katherine drove out of the underground parking lot in her Range Rover, heading not home but to the building where Mark worked. The Upper East Side was quiet at this hour. Most people were still at work, and those who had returned were sitting inside, sheltering from the December cold. She parked in front of a 5-story residential building, older, from the 1980s, with peeling walls and small balconies. So different from her modern house. She took the bag and got out of the car. She didn't know exactly where to find him. Maintenance supervisors usually had small offices in basements or on ground floors. She started looking, feeling absurdly ridiculous in her $3,000 suit, walking through corridors that smelled of old linoleum and boiled cabbage. And then she saw him. Mark was coming out of a utility room, carrying boxes of Christmas ornaments. He wore the same blue coveralls, but this time with the addition of an old wool cap on his head. He looked tired, but when he saw her, he stopped in his tracks. "Miss Katherine," he said, surprise clearly showing on his face. He almost dropped the boxes. "Mark," she replied, feeling her voice sound too formal, too stiff. "I came to return your fleece." She held out the bag. Mark set the boxes on the floor and wiped his hands on his coveralls before accepting it. "Thank you," he said, looking inside. "But really, you didn't have to. I told you." "I know what you said," Katherine interrupted. "But it's yours. And I wanted to thank you. Properly. Not in the rain when I was in shock." Mark looked at her, his brown eyes searching for something in her face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The corridor was quiet, only the old heating system rattling somewhere in the wall. "You don't have to thank me," Mark finally said. His voice was soft. "Anyone would have done it." "No," Katherine answered, shaking her head. "Not everyone." And it was true. She knew it. In her world, people would have walked by, taken photos with their phones, called the tabloids. No one would have offered a hand without counting the cost. "Do you have a moment?" Mark suddenly asked, gesturing to the room he'd come from. "I just made some tea. It's not luxurious, but it's warm." Katherine should have declined. She still had 3 emails to send. A conference call with a client in Tokyo at 8 p.m., a report to read. But instead, she heard her own voice saying, "Yes, I have a moment." Mark's room was small, maybe 100 square feet, with one window facing the parking lot, an old desk, 2 chairs, and an electric kettle on a metal shelf. The walls were bare except for one framed photo, a man, probably Mark but younger with shorter hair, standing next to a woman and a small girl. All 3 were smiling. Katherine tried not to stare too long, but Mark noticed. "My family," he said quietly, pouring hot water into 2 mugs with tea bags. "From 10 years ago." "Is that your daughter?" Katherine asked, sitting in one of the chairs. It was hard, uncomfortable, but somehow honest. "Sophie," Mark replied with a smile that lit up his entire face. "She's 16 now. Lives with my ex-wife in Boston. I see her every 2 months and during vacations. It's too little." There was such honest longing in his voice that Katherine felt a tightness in her chest. "Why did you split up?" she asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "No, it's okay," Mark answered, handing her a mug. Their fingers brushed for a moment, and Katherine felt a strange warmth where they touched. "We split up 5 years ago. I was working too much, 3 jobs at once, trying to pay off the mortgage. She felt lonely. Met someone else. Someone who had more time." "I'm sorry," Katherine said quietly. "That's reality," Mark answered, shrugging, but there was something in his eyes that said it still hurt. "And you? You live alone in that big house." Katherine froze with the mug at her lips. No one asked her such questions. No one would dare. "Yes," she finally answered. "My ex-husband left 3 years ago. Found someone younger, more fun, less busy." "I understand," Mark said, and strangely enough, Katherine believed he really did understand. They sat in silence, sipping cheap tea from paper cups while outside it started to rain again. It wasn't an awkward silence. It wasn't a forced silence. It was comfortable, as if they'd known each other longer than one day. "Why didn't you look?" "Yesterday," Katherine suddenly asked, the words flowing out before she could stop them. "At my blouse." Most men would have looked. Mark set down his mug and looked her straight in the eyes. "Because you didn't want me to look," he said simply. "And because it wasn't mine. Sometimes people find themselves in situations they didn't choose. That doesn't mean they deserve less respect." Katherine felt something in her throat tighten. When was the last time someone talked to her about respect? When was the last time someone saw her as a person, not as a tool to be used? "Thank you," she whispered, not trusting her voice to say more. Mark nodded and smiled, not wide, not showy, just a small, honest smile that reached his eyes. Katherine stayed longer than she'd planned. 30 minutes. An hour. They talked about everything and nothing, about the weather, about New York, about how the city had changed over the last 20 years. Mark told her about his work, about the strange things people left in the trash, about the neighbor on the 3rd floor who had 23 cats. Katherine found herself laughing, really laughing. Not that polite business laugh she'd practiced for years. Mark had a way of telling stories that was simple but funny, full of small observations about human quirks. When she finally looked at her watch, it was already 7 p.m. She'd missed the conference call with Tokyo. She'd ignored 20 messages. And strangely enough, she didn't care. "God, I have to go," she said, standing up quickly. Her knee hit the desk. The mug wobbled, but Mark caught it at the last moment. "Careful," he said with a smile. "We don't want another wet blouse." Katherine blushed, actually blushed like a teenager, and quickly grabbed her purse. "I'm sorry for taking up your time," she said, heading for the door. "Don't apologize," Mark answered, following her. "It was nice. I rarely get a chance to talk to someone who doesn't complain about the broken elevator." They stood at the building entrance. Outside, the rain had turned to light drizzle, and streetlights cast orange light on the wet asphalt. Katherine's car looked grotesquely luxurious parked next to the old Hondas and Toyotas. "Mark," she said, turning to him, Could I take you to dinner? To thank you properly. Not in your room, not with cheap tea. A real dinner?" Mark hesitated. His eyes moved between her and her car. For a moment, Katherine thought he would refuse, and she couldn't understand why that hurt so much. "You don't have to," he began. "I know," she interrupted, "but I want to." Their eyes met again, and this time there was something different in the air. Something thicker, more charged. Something that made Katherine's heart beat faster. "All right," Mark finally said, smiling slowly. "But on one condition." "What condition?" "Not in any fancy restaurant with menus in 5 languages," he said firmly. "Somewhere normal. Somewhere they serve burgers and don't ask if you prefer sparkling or still water." Katherine laughed loud, genuine. "Deal," she said, extending her hand. Mark shook it. His grip was strong, warm, safe. And when they separated, Katherine found she didn't want to let go. "Saturday?" she asked. "At 6. "Saturday at 6, Mark confirmed. Katherine got into her car, started the engine, and drove away. But the whole way home, she looked in the rearview mirror, seeing Mark standing in the rain, watching her disappear. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Katherine Wilson felt something in her life beginning to change. Something small, something fragile, something that could be the beginning of something bigger. And it terrified and excited her in equal measure. Katherine spent 3 hours trying to decide what to wear. 3 hours. She, a woman who could make a decision about acquiring a company worth millions in 5 minutes, couldn't choose an outfit for dinner with a maintenance worker. Her closet was full of Armani suits, Dior dresses, Versace blouses, everything elegant, everything expensive, everything completely wrong for a casual dinner at a burger joint. Finally, she chose something simple. Dark jeans she'd bought 3 years ago and never worn, a cream cashmere sweater and brown ankle boots. No jewelry. Minimal makeup. Hair loose, wavy on her shoulders. When she looked in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize herself. She looked normal. Younger. Almost like that Katherine from 20 years ago, before success, money, and divorce built walls around her heart that she'd arranged to meet Mark in front of Joe's Diner, a small place in Brooklyn. Katherine had never been there. Her world revolved around Manhattan, around modern restaurants with Michelin stars and rooftop cocktail bars. But when she parked her Range Rover in front of the diner and walked inside, she felt strangely at home. The walls were lined with old photos of New York. The air smelled of grilled meat and onions, and at a table in the corner sat an elderly couple holding hands and eating soup. Mark was already there, sitting at a table by the window, dressed in a black shirt and dark jeans. His hair was still damp, as if he'd just gotten out of the shower, and his beard was freshly trimmed. He looked handsome. Not in that polished way she was used to, but in a real, rugged, masculine way. When he saw her, he stood up and smiled. That slow, genuine smile of his. And Katherine felt something in her stomach flip. "Katherine," he said, approaching to pull out her chair. "You look beautiful." "So do you," she answered before she could stop herself. She blushed immediately. "I mean, you look good." Mark laughed, a low, warm sound that made her blush even more. "Thank you," he said, sitting across from her. "I don't remember the last time I dressed up like this. Sophie would laugh if she saw me." "Your daughter?" Katherine asked, opening the menu. The prices were absurdly low. Burgers for $12, soup for $8. She probably spent more on coffee at the office. "Yes," Mark answered. His eyes softened at the memory. I talked to her today, told her I was going to dinner with a friend. Friend. The word hung in the air between them. Were they friends? Could they be? A woman who made millions a year and a man who fixed pipes and cleaned trash. What did she say? Katherine asked, setting down the menu. That it's impossible because I don't have friends. Mark answered with a crooked smile. Then she asked if it was a woman. When I said yes, she started screaming so loud I thought my phone would explode. Katherine laughed despite herself. She sounds like a good girl. The best, Mark answered quietly. She's the only thing I did right in life. The waitress came, an older woman with a round face and a warm smile, and took their order. Katherine ordered a bacon cheeseburger and fries. Mark got a classic burger with coleslaw. They both ordered beer, something Katherine hadn't drunk since college. When the waitress left, a silence fell. But this time it wasn't comfortable. This time it was charged with something indefinable, something electric. Can I ask you something? Mark finally said, taking a sip of beer. Of course. Why did you invite me? He asked directly. Really? It's not about returning the fleece. You could have done that and left. So why? Katherine froze. It was a good question. A question she didn't have a good answer to. I don't know, she answered honestly. Maybe because talking to you was easy. And in my life, nothing is easy. Everything is politics, strategy, calculating moves. But with you, we just talked. Mark nodded as if he understood. My turn, Katherine said. Why did you agree to come? You could have refused. I could have, Mark admitted. But I would have been sorry. And I was curious. Curious. Who you are, he explained, looking her straight in the eyes. Not the CEO, not the woman from the magazine. Just who Katherine is. No one had said her name like that in years. Not like a title, not like a tool. Like something precious. I'm boring, she finally said, not knowing why she was telling the truth. I work 18 hours a day. I read financial reports before bed. My closest friend is my assistant, who's paid to talk to me. I live alone in a huge house, and sometimes weeks go by without me talking to anyone about anything real. Her voice cracked on the last word. Damn it. She didn't want to cry. Not here, not now. But Mark just reached across the table and placed his hand on hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The touch said more than words. I'm alone too, he said quietly. My daughter is in Boston. My ex-wife remarried. My parents are dead. I work alone, eat alone, sleep alone. Sometimes a week goes by and the only conversations I have are about broken pipes and trash bills. Their eyes met, really met, and Katherine saw in him the same thing she felt in herself. Loneliness. Deep, pulsing loneliness that no amount of money, no success could fill. You're not boring, Mark added, squeezing her hand lightly. You're the most interesting person I've met in years. The food came, and it was wonderful. Not in the way food at fancy restaurants was wonderful. Perfectly seasoned, beautifully plated, technically amazing. It was wonderful in a way that made you feel at home. The burger was heavy, greasy, full of flavor. The fries were crispy and salty. The beer was cold and bitter. They talked through the entire dinner, about everything. About childhood. She grew up in a small town in upstate New York, he in Brooklyn. About dreams. She always wanted to prove she was worth more than everyone said. He wanted to be a musician, but life went a different way. About mistakes. Her marriage was a disaster from the start. His fell apart because he worked too much, loved too little. Do you ever regret it? Katherine asked, sipping her second beer. She felt slightly dizzy, partly from the alcohol, partly from the closeness. That you didn't become a musician? Every day, Mark answered honestly. But then I look at Sophie's picture and know that if I'd gone a different way, she wouldn't exist. And she's worth every unachieved dream. You're a good father, Katherine said quietly. I try, Mark answered. That's all I can do, try. They split the bill. Katherine insisted on paying, but Mark insisted on splitting it in half. Finally, they compromised. She paid for the food, he paid for the beer. They walked outside, where the December cold hit them like a wall. New York was beautiful at this time of year. Streets decorated with Christmas lights, snow beginning to fall lightly, people hurrying with bags full of gifts. "Can I walk you to your car?" Mark asked. "Yes," Katherine answered, though her car was literally 10 feet away. They walked slowly, shoulder to shoulder, their breaths forming small clouds of vapor in the cold air. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. When they reached her Range Rover, they stopped. Katherine turned to him, not knowing what to say, how to end this evening. "Thank you," she finally said, "for coming, for talking, for being yourself." "Thank you," Mark answered. His voice was low, intimate. "I don't remember the last time I had such a good evening." They were standing too close. Katherine could feel his warmth, smell his soap, see the small wrinkles around his eyes. Her heart was beating so hard she thought he must hear it. "Mark," she began, but didn't know how to finish. "Yes." His eyes moved across her face, stopping on her lips for a moment too long to be accidental. Her voice trailed off. What was she doing? What was she planning? This was a maintenance worker, a man who probably made in a month what she spent on a business lunch. A man from a different world, a different class, a different life. But he was also the man who didn't look when he could have, who gave her his fleece, who listened when she spoke, who saw her, really saw her, not as a tool, not as a symbol, but as Katherine. And suddenly nothing else mattered. Katherine reached out and touched his cheek. Mark froze under her touch, his breath becoming shallower. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then so slowly they were barely moving at all, they leaned toward each other. The kiss was gentle, almost shy, their lips barely touching, warm and soft. But even in that lightness, there was something deep, something that made Katherine's knees weak. Mark placed his hands on her waist, pulling her closer, and Katherine wrapped her arms around his neck, fingers burying in his hair. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, more desperate, as if they'd both been thirsty for years and were only now finding water. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Mark rested his forehead against hers, his hands still on her waist. "God," he whispered. "Katherine." "I know," she answered, closing her eyes. "I know. It was crazy. It was impossible." She was a wealthy CEO. He was a maintenance worker. Their worlds were so different they shouldn't even touch. But in that moment, standing on an empty Brooklyn street with snow falling around them and Christmas lights reflecting in their eyes, none of it mattered. "I want to see you again," Mark said, looking deep into her eyes. "I know it's crazy. I know we're from different worlds, but I can't stop thinking about you." "Me too," Katherine admitted, her voice barely audible. "Since that night. Since the fleece. Since everything." "What do we do now?" Mark asked, his thumb drawing small circles on her waist through her sweater. Katherine thought. She could say it was a mistake. She could get in her car and drive away and never look back. She could return to her safe, lonely, controlled life, or she could risk it. She could jump into the unknown. She could let herself feel something real for the first time in years. "We'll see each other again," she said firmly. "Tomorrow. The day after. Whenever we can." "People will talk," Mark warned. "They'll judge us." "Let them talk," Katherine answered, surprising herself. She who always cared what people thought, whose life was built on image. "I don't care." Mark smiled widely, genuine, beautiful. "Okay," he said. "Then we'll see each other tomorrow." He kissed her again, shorter this time but equally intense. Then he stepped back, his hands slowly releasing her waist. "Drive safely," he said. "You too," Katherine answered, getting into her car. But as she drove away, watching Mark become smaller in the rearview mirror, she knew that safety was the last thing she felt now. She felt alive, terrified, ecstatic. She felt like a woman who had just started falling and who wasn't sure if anyone would catch her. But for the first time in her life, she didn't care, because falling felt like flying. Katherine and Mark met in secret for the next 2 weeks. Every day, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 10 minutes between meetings. In his small room, in her car parked on dark streets, in small cafes where no one knew them. Each meeting was stolen. Each kiss was full of desperation, as if it might be the last. Because they both knew this couldn't last forever. that eventually their worlds would collide. And it happened in the most brutal way. It was Wednesday, December 20th. Katherine had an important board meeting, an annual presentation for investors. Everything was going perfectly. The numbers were excellent, the strategy was solid, success was guaranteed. Until Peter Miller, one of the board members, a man who had always envied her, opened his laptop and threw a photo on the big screen. It was a picture of Katherine and Mark kissing by her car. Clear, undeniable, compromising. The conference room froze. "So it's true," Peter said, his voice sweet as poison. "Our esteemed CEO is having an affair with a maintenance worker, a man who makes minimum wage. How very romantic." Laughter rippled through the room. Not loud, not open, but enough. Enough for Katherine to feel her world starting to crumble. "This is my private life," she said, her voice icy controlled. "It has nothing to do with my work." "But it does," Peter replied, standing up. "You're the face of this company. You represent us to clients, to the media. And now you're the woman who's sleeping with a maintenance worker. Do you think our Japanese partners will accept this? Do you think the media will stay silent?" "Enough," Katherine snarled, slamming her hand on the table. "My personal life is none of your business." "It became our business when it was published on the internet," Peter answered, turning his laptop around. "Check Twitter, Instagram. You're already viral." Katherine pulled out her phone with trembling hands and saw hundreds of messages, thousands of comments, photos, memes, headlines. Rich CEO and her poor lover. Scandal in Manhattan business. Does love cross class lines? She felt naked. She felt betrayed. She felt like everything she'd worked for over 20 years was falling apart in real time. "Meeting adjourned," she said quietly, gathering her things. "Katherine, wait," Magdalena began, but Katherine was already walking out, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. She drove straight to Mark. She didn't think, didn't plan. She just drove. She found him cleaning the stairwell, dressed in his blue coveralls, earbuds in. He didn't hear her approach, didn't see the tears on her face. "Mark," she said, her voice breaking. He turned and saw her, the real her, uncontrolled, inelegant. Not the powerful businesswoman, just Katherine, broken, scared, hurt. "What happened?" he asked immediately, removing his earbuds and approaching her. "Katherine, what happened?" "They know," she whispered. "Everyone knows about us. There are photos on the internet. Everywhere." Mark's face went pale. "God," he whispered. "I'm sorry. This is all my fault. All because of me." "No," Katherine answered, shaking her head violently. "No, this isn't your fault. I'm the one who kissed you. I'm the one who wanted to continue this." "What do we do now?" Mark asked, taking her hands in his. And that was the question, wasn't it? What now? Katherine could end it. She could say it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. She could return to her life, to her company, to her image. She could save everything she'd built. Everything except what she felt for him. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "The board wants me to leave you. The media wants a scandal. Everyone expects me to choose work." "And what will you choose?" Mark asked quietly, his eyes searching her face. Katherine looked at him, really looked. She saw the wrinkles around his eyes, the scars on his hands from years of hard work, the way he looked at her, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And then she thought about her empty house, the cold meetings, the years of loneliness hidden behind business smiles, and suddenly she knew. "I choose you," she said, her voice strong, certain. "I choose you, Mark." His eyes widened. "Are you sure? Your career, your reputation." "To hell with reputation," she interrupted. "For 20 years I lived for others, for shareholders, for the media, for people who didn't even care. But you see me, the real me, and that's worth more than any title." Mark pulled her to him, holding her tight. Katherine buried her face in his neck, feeling the scent of his soap, the warmth of his body. "It will be hard," he whispered into her hair. "People will talk. They'll judge us." "Let them talk," Katherine answered. "I have you. That's all I need." The next day, Katherine called a press conference. The media arrived in droves. Everyone wanted to see her fall, her humiliation. But instead, they saw something different. They saw a woman standing confidently before the cameras, dressed not in a suit but in a simple black sweater and jeans. Beside her stood Mark, nervous but strong, holding her hand. "My name is Katherine Wilson," she began, her voice clear. "For 20 years I was a CEO of a tech company. For 20 years I dedicated every moment of my life to work. And I was deeply, completely unhappy." The room was quiet. But then I met Mark, a man who showed me that life is more than numbers on a balance sheet, who taught me that a person's value isn't measured by their salary, who gave me something I hadn't had in years: happiness. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "So today I'm resigning as CEO. Not because I'm forced to, but because I'm choosing life over work. I'm choosing love over success. I'm choosing to be happy instead of being rich." Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Katherine heard only one thing: Mark's quiet voice whispering, "I'm proud of you." 6 months later, Katherine stood in a small apartment in Brooklyn, an apartment she'd rented with Mark. It wasn't big, wasn't luxurious, but it was theirs. On the table lay a photo: Mark, Katherine, and Sophie, Mark's daughter, all smiling during a weekend trip together in the mountains. Katherine had started a small consulting business, working from home. She made far less than before, but she had time. Time for breakfasts, for walks, for life. Mark still worked as a maintenance supervisor, but now he came home to someone waiting for him. Someone who loved him not for what he had, but for who he was. "Ready?" Mark asked, entering the room in a black suit. Today was their wedding. Small, intimate, just closest friends and Sophie. "Ready," Katherine answered, taking his hand. And as they walked out together, they didn't see luxury cars and red carpets. They saw real life, difficult, imperfect, beautiful. Because sometimes the greatest courage isn't building an empire. The greatest courage is allowing yourself to be happy. And Katherine Wilson, former CEO, current consultant, future wife of a maintenance worker, was finally, for the first time in her life, truly, completely happy.